Sarah, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity and this listening session to get a framework for where the Office of Historic Preservation is moving forward. I have a couple things to ask about, but I wanted to just start with one and then let someone else speak and then maybe kind of come back to me if there's time.
Sure.
So, one of the things that in 2018, I'm going to tie resiliency and historic. Um, Landmarks came out with a resilient historic building design guide in 2018. And I just be curious if there's any initiatives will be sort of bringing that more up to date. And then also I wanted to point out that in my historic district of Fort Point, we are an industrial historic district, and one of the defining characteristics is that there weren't trees. You know, we had buildings right up to sidewalks, we had trains and wagons and, mobility at the time going right up to loading docks and storing and moving goods between that and the marine industry. So we have sort of a tension between wanting to increase our tree canopy and that not being a character defining characteristic. And so we are hoping that we can see some more synergies between achieving climate resilience and also preserving the character and fabric of our district.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I'll take those in reverse order. I certainly share that desired intent and direction of travel. Just because it hadn't been done previously in a historic district does not mean in all cases that we don't want to evolve. In particular, our public realm and right of way and tree canopy coverage is something that's important to make sure that we're addressing in every neighborhood of the city. But we want to make sure we're doing it the right way. But that shouldn't be a sacrosanct cannot find the right solution in any neighborhood. I'm glad you raised coastal resilience and climate resilience in relation to historic preservation. We of the climate action themes that I'll be spearheading near term going forward, climate resilience writ large and coastal resilience in particular is one of those themes. You'll hear some announcements in the coming weeks on how we're organizing internally to better deliver on climate resilience. And then the intent of City Hall is to launch an update of the climate action plan process early this fall, which will be the first update since 2019. And it will certainly include reference to and updates as useful to the role of historic preservation and climate resilience and where we can go from there. But you mentioned a really important document around strategies for historic buildings around the impacts of climate change. So more to come on your first question shortly.
Great.
Thank you. Vicky, you have a question. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, yes, I'm Vicky Rugo. I've lived in the Ashmont Hill neighborhood of Dorchester for going on 50 years, and I'm also on the board of the Dorchester Historical Society. And I guess my first question, and it might even relate to some of the other organizations that are here, is that, you say you want to hear from us, but I'm thinking it would be very helpful if we were to have an opportunity to, actually sit down with you and members of our board to just go over some of the issues that we have been confronting for many years in Dorchester. So I don't know, I was hoping Earl Taylor, who's the president of the board, would be here too, but he's obviously otherwise occupied. But I mean, is there a mechanism for actually just scheduling a meeting with you? Or is that not something that you would do, but it would be whoever takes Murray Miller's position, or where do we go with that first? That's my first question. Then I have a couple other quick ones.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, and this is the first, as Kawana had mentioned at the outset, of the 4 themed conversations we're going to have: historic, environment, open space, and food justice. And we're going to make sure Kawana will add this to our preamble. This is a virtual listening session to be able to talk to all of you in a combined space and get a sense of priorities and direction of travel. I am also planning a series of neighborhood tours across those 4 themes, where I'd be really excited to to see what's important to you and meet with groups. Those will be organized obviously cross thematically, so that when I'm visiting Dorchester, I can have some meetings with historic stakeholders, I can have some meetings with environmental groups, I can have some meetings with food justice and parks groups in the neighborhood. And then more than happy, Vicki, to meet with you and your group as needed separately from that here at City Hall or elsewhere. But this is part of the listening tour. This is not sort of the only time you'll see me. I do want to get out to the neighborhoods and see in person what your priorities are.
Okay, that's great. My other question is a very local one, which actually came up at the presentation that Marie Miller did in our neighborhood. Ashmont Hill was the first of the architectural conservation districts. Nick is nodding his head, to be proposed, and it's still pending. And when I asked if we had any way of either reactivating it or revisiting it, I don't know that I got a clear answer. So I guess I would just be curious to know, is there a way forward with that? Because there does seem to be some interest in revisiting it, although obviously there would have to be a lot of sort of reevaluation of the guidelines that were proposed. It reached to the point where it was going to a vote to the Landmarks Commission. So it's been through the whole study, report, inventory, all of that. But well, it was the late 70s. So that's a lot has changed since then. And so I don't know what what we could do to push that forward.
Yep, and thank you for raising that one in particular. There is, as I know, folks on the call appreciate a pretty lengthy list of both study reports for particular building designations as well as potential architectural districts. That is something that we want to go through and prioritize, and certainly has my attention. We're not going to simply do this based on first in line or how old it is. We need to prioritize based on both historical significance and change that is planned or predictable in terms of what is the threat to that historical preservation that we may be most interested in preserving. But prioritizing that list and finding a pathway to get through the existing and pending study reports is front and foremost.
Okay, thank you. I'll mute myself now.
Thank you, Vicki. Next, we have Amanda. Should be able to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Gwana. Yes, Amanda Zettel. I am president of Charlestown Preservation Society. And I also have a seat on the City of Boston's Commemoration Commission. I am basically my question was a little bit covered by Vicki, but basically, there's an incredible backlog of pending designations for the entire city. So I was going to ask, if you have a vision for that methodology for choosing what moves forward. And then to tack onto that, will that methodology extend to CPA project selections? Excuse me.
Yeah, 2 great questions. So one, I think we want to co-develop that prioritization of how do we make our way through the backlog of both building and district proposed designations. So I'm not going to do that in a vacuum. I do think, again, we don't want to overweight how old the submission is. We want to weight it based on expected historical outcome in terms of what we're preserving. Does it meet other values, and come up with criteria together. This will be, as you all know, this will be a multi-year effort to work that backlog down. But we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that, again, prioritizes things that are at risk and things that are significant to preserve, not just how long it's been sitting in the queue. Related to CPA, as I mentioned a little bit in my intro remarks, that is one of the resources that did not exist when I was here the last time, that I am really interested in making sure we use most strategically. So we have several $1 million a year to devote to capital projects in historic preservation every year. What does success look like for that in a 5 to 10 year period? And for me, that is beyond just neighborhood diversity of historic preservation projects. The equitable distribution of that is really important. But what do we most collectively as a community, want to preserve and what's most at risk, given that capital dollars that, can continue to provide. I am cognizant that, that'll involve us creating organizations, because most of these projects are done by third parties, of working with folks to identify and then enable groups to go after projects. We want to be careful not to, solely be prioritizing projects that are put forward by groups that are organized, because that leads us to a place, where sort of the folks in the know have access to the capital. And are we really doing justice to, equitably and effectively preserving the rich history of Boston? But the CPA, Amanda, is a role, a resource that I want to engage with the community on what success looks like comprehensively, not as just the CPA.
That's great. Just to follow up, do you sort of envision like an idea around equitable distribution between neighborhoods in terms of, which designations move forward? And I'll get a little more granular. Charlestown has had, pending designations districts for, 30, 40 years, but we also have a couple of, newer designations that have been kind of sitting, waiting to move forward. But we actually have no official designations for districts. So I don't know if we're, are you planning to look at everything on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, or just sort of like broader city of Boston priorities? So that's, I guess, my follow-up.
Yeah, I'd say it's a yes and. In my mind, it's sort of not an either or. There's a citywide approach, and then there's making sure that I'm engaging with, BLC and district and survey staff, and then you all as stakeholders to make sure within your existing neighborhoods we're prioritizing the right things to move forward. We should have some movement on the Monument Square district shortly. That one has been raised to my attention and is very much ready for the next step in its review. But I want to make sure, again, as I get up to speed on what are the priorities of the districts that I'm hearing, not just from City Hall staff, but we're re-engaging with you all as stakeholders in the neighborhoods to understand and embed your priorities in ours.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning Monument Square. It's important to us.
Great. Thank you. Next, we have Eva. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Eva Webster, and I was the original proponent of the Aberdeen Architectural Conservation District in Brighton, which is really the outermost district in Boston because we are bordering Brookline and Newton. And the essence of our district is that we used to be developed as a classic streetcar suburb. And that means that the surviving homes were always meant to have a generous open space. And, there are front yards and backyards and so on. And now we are seeing that developers who buy those homes, they're looking for opportunities to densify those properties, which is in conflict with maintaining that streetcar suburb character. And so I just learned somebody wants to build a separate building in the backyard, which is in conflict with the original house. And I'm also concerned about rezoning initiatives in Allston Brighton, which may affect our district and may also threaten some worthy of preservation properties and structures. So I guess I'm looking for some comfort to know that the Office of Historic Preservation will have a say and will be willing to weigh in when the upzoning people end up, pushing their favored agenda. Because I believe that you cannot have an architectural conservation district that seeks to maintain the character of a streetcar suburb if every remaining open space will be filled in with additional structures and additions. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, yes. So I certainly hear that concern. I think first and foremost, I'm going to do my best to make sure that the Office of Historic Preservation is present and active in all of those conversations around streets and squares, around the planning that's happening in Boston, so that the interests of historic preservation are fully considered, and that we find paths forward that simultaneously, as much as possible, respect and enhance and celebrate the historic character and significance of neighborhoods, while recognizing that cities are places of evolution and development and changing needs. And again, I don't think it's either or. For me, Phallic like Epstein Farm is a great example. In the downtown, I think Atlantic Wharf is a great example. This isn't just about preservation as being static. Preservation is part of economic development, and how do we make buildings and places useful going forward, so that the historic preservation is through active management of those assets and development over time. So the devil is always in the details, and these are challenging conversations we'll have, but certainly my intent is to have historic preservation actively engaged in all these conversations, so that we'll be transparent with tensions as they arrive, and transparent with decisions as as they come to fruition as well, and that folks don't feel at all out of the loop on direction of travel in any particular neighborhood.
Thank you.
Next, we have Michael. You should be able to now unmute yourself.
I'm Michael Reiskin from Jamaica Plain. I've got 4 questions. I'll ask only 2 and then come back. They're related. The first one is, might be contrary to working on your backlog of historic designations, but is there any idea of adding local significance to the criteria for historic designation in addition to state and national significance? I think this is important to folks in Boston.
Nick, do you want to comment on a technical? I mean, my understanding is we've clarified that we have the ability to designate just with local significance. So.
Yep. So just this year, at the beginning of the year, there was a legal analysis by Marie Miller, as well as our legal team, and we have confirmed that local significant buildings are able to be landmarked in the city of Boston based on the existing language for Chapter 772.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, now we have more work to do, but all right, add it to the backlog, but good. And the other question, which is also related to demolition delay, is can you make your applications for demolition delay more accessible to residents? They used to be posted on the city's website individually, which is probably a little too much. And now they're hidden. You have to go to the portal and look it up by neighborhood. And it's very hard. And if you don't do it within 10 days, you lose all standing to talk about demolition delay. So can you improve that significantly so that people in the neighborhoods have some access to at-risk buildings?
Thank you for that suggestion. We can certainly, I'll follow up with Nick on ideas, but if you have specific ideas of the best ways of communicating those, those are obviously public decisions and documents that we've made. So I don't see any concern of, how we distribute is really, who would want early, notice of those actions being taken. My philosophy on all things related to historic preservation is, we need to be transparent with folks, as early as possible. And that includes, owners who were, contemplating doing study reports because, from my perspective, we don't do historic preservation to buildings. We do it, with owners about history that involves buildings. And we have much better end results and outcomes when we involve all stakeholders as early as possible in the process.
Great, thank you.
Next, Sarah, you should be able to now unmute yourself.
Did you want to go to Susan because I've already spoken and then come back to me?
Sure.
Okay.
Susan, would you like to go first before Sarah?
Thank you. First, I want to welcome Brian. Welcome. back, and also congratulate Alexa. I know that she used to be at Landmarks before she went to planning, so that seems like a good move as an interim director. Mine is not so much a question as a request that you look at demo delay, partly the notice that Michael's already mentioned, how that's done, and partly the criteria that you use on deciding what projects go to a hearing. I think part of the problem with the notice is that we've gone from one extreme, or older went for a hearing. And now the criteria seems to be that if it's either that it almost has to be eligible to be a landmark before it goes to demo delay hearing, or that there's some public outcry, which, as Michael says, if we don't know about it, we can't say, oh, wait a minute, this project is this building is important to the neighborhood. It may not be a landmark, but it is. And I think finding some middle ground could address several issues that you brought up. One is the sustainability of keeping existing buildings as opposed to tearing them. The other is allowing the community to keep part of the fabric of their community, which is important, contributes to the neighborhood. And the third, that often these are naturally affordable housing. And when developers think that they can, when they're so confident that they can tear these buildings down, they're paying more than a homeowner could pay to buy that house and keep it as a residence in a, you know. So I'm asking that you look at demo delay and find some middle ground in that criteria as you go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and good to see you as well. And thank you for the welcome back. You know, the demo delay is on the list of things to look at. I think there's been one, we need to make sure that we are, you know, fully compliant with the statutory authorities at the moment. And then two, we need to look at it, you know, more holistically, you know, to your point, and say, is it accomplishing the aim with which it was intended to? And if not, are there things that we need to tweak about how we're applying it? You know, and potentially reform, you know, Article 85 to get there. So, yeah, it is on the list as an important tool, and I think, you know, it's time for us to look afresh at that as we look at, you know, many of our other processes.
Awesome. And now, Sarah, if you would like, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring up an issue that I know is at great risk to the Fort Point Historic District and our commission, and that is vacancies. And I'm not suggesting that we add commissioners for commissioners' sake. However, we are down to 2 commissioners right now. That's it. And we cannot conduct business that way. We have businesses in the neighborhood who are, you know, trying to or will be coming online. We have a building that is under consideration for the residential office pilot conversion in the neighborhood, a historic building. And it's just critical that we are able to get at least enough commissioners in order to conduct a business. I think it's something that the neighborhood expects, and that the city should be able to provide. And I'm happy to go into further detail, but I do know that there are vacancies across commissions. I don't know if there's any commission that's in the point of not being able to meet to conduct any business for the foreseeable future. But I also would like to suggest that the process become more transparent, because where we seem to lose applicants is when they meet with landmark staff, they get recommended, and then they go into sort of a black hole where they're never seen again. And we've worked really hard to make our requirements more appealing that just got approved, but it's very hard to get people to be willing to put their hat in the ring if they don't ever hear back. So I just wanted to highlight, I know this isn't unique to our district, although I do feel that we are at extreme risk right at the moment.
Sure. No, it's a great comment, Sarah. I know in your particular circumstance with Fort Point, there is a commissioner slated to be on the city council agenda. You know, IGR is working on that particular appointment. So hopefully we're resolving that quorum issue near term. But your broader point is very valid and something that I am focused on as one. Commissioner appointments and a predictable and faster process. I've had a few meetings on the 5th floor to understand how do we deliver on that, because these are volunteer approaches and people don't want to be in limbo for a long time, and honestly we don't want a downward spiral of people volunteering their time. It's nothing more frustrating than somebody blocking out time on any of our commissions, and this is not unique to just historic and landmark commissions. But blocking out time on their calendar and then finding out, shortly before that they're not going to have a quorum, and they could have, scheduled that time differently. So one, you certainly have my commitment to working on making our process more efficient and predictable. And then two, I think, to my earlier, intro remarks, I want us to be really careful that we're aligning around efficiency and effectiveness of historic outcomes going forward. For me, success is not measured by how many separate district commissions or how many volunteer commissioners we have. It's measured by the historic preservation outcomes and us being as efficient and effective on delivering that. And I think we need to we need to understand that every time we create a separate body that requires management, that requires volunteers, that requires hours spent, and we want to align that to make sure it's done in an efficient, effective way. And if there are other ways of accomplishing that aim that allow us to move faster and spend resources more efficiently, both your time, and staff time, then we should think about that as well.
Thank you. I have some more details that I can submit offline.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Michael?
So two questions. You mentioned the historic signs on Russia Wharf and how effective those are. I'd like to ask that the Landmarks Commission work again to get historic signs up into the neighborhoods. They used to co-sponsor them with the Bostonian Society, and I think that was very effective, and it has a wonderful design, those green signs. But the Bostonian Society, when they changed their strategy, they dropped that program completely. And I think it would be good if you could restart that program under the Landmarks Commission again. I think it has a big bang for the buck on regarding people understanding history and learning from it. So that's first request. And then the second request is also the Bostonian Society, when they re-strategized, also dropped a program that I think was very effective. They used to have a convocation of all the historical societies of Boston once a year at the old State House, sort of a consortium, and a little program on a Saturday morning and maybe a lunch. And that was very good for people to come up with ideas and learning from each other. And perhaps you could start that again instead of the Bostonian Society doing that. You could maybe ask Sue Goganian. She had, I think she had run them for the Bostonian Society near the end. Please, thanks.
Great, thank you, Michael. I'll ask Nick to take those down so that we can consider those. But I love the suggestions. Anything that we can do to collaborate better on historic preservation ideas, and then bring stories to life for folks, in all our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Now Ava.
I can
Um,
see that Mark raised his hand and he hasn't spoken yet, so I can wait. Maybe
Sure.
Mark will go first.
Oh, thank you, Eva, and thank you, Quana and Brian, for doing this. Thank you very much, Brian. Good to see you, and good to see you at the signing ceremony for the expansion of the historic Beacon Hill District recently. I should have introduced myself. I'm Mark Kiefer. I'm the chairman of the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission, and I'm privileged to work with my colleague you see there on the screen, Nick Armada. And I wanted to just address maybe two issues that have come up in the course of the conversation, which I think has been very helpful. And the first just is on this issue of vacancies and so forth and efficiency. We at the moment are not struggling with the issue of vacancies, but we certainly have in the past. So I very much appreciate that challenge. And candidly, while our vacancies have largely been filled, it did take a long time. So I appreciate the efforts to try to make that process faster. But at the same time, I will say candidly, when I hear, Brian, you talk about emphasizing outcomes rather than the number of commissioners, maybe particularly in light of the aforementioned sort of visioning session that Murray put on a little while back, which I did attend, I get a little nervous. And I just wanted to make a plea, an emphatic plea, not implying that this is what you were intending or imagining, but to make a plea for not taking authority, responsibility, decision-making away from local commissions. Because I think in addition to the significant amount of obviously experience, expertise, institutional knowledge, and so forth that's represented in those commissions, maybe a sometimes overlooked critical aspect in the historic preservation process that they provide, of course, is this layer of transparency and public input. I think one of the participants a moment ago kind of referred to this idea of things disappearing into a black hole. And I think it's fair to say, and the city should be rightly commended, for the tremendous strides that have been made in historic preservation of the city of Boston over the last 70 years since our commission, the Beacon Hill Commission, was first created. And the fact that we even have things like a director of the Office of Historic Preservation, and Brian, that your position is overseeing what we do, I think those are all great positive steps in the right direction. But I think the reality is, when you look, for example, just literally across the street from the now expanded border of the historic Beacon Hill District on Cambridge Street, you see a massive project by Mass General Hospital that at least some of us in the community think is sort of wildly out of scale for the community. And if nothing else, we can just say objectively that it swept into its wake a few of the remaining historic buildings in the West End, which were demolished, to make room for that project. And so the long lingering concerns of community members, particularly like folks in the West End, remain. And so I think we just need to be very careful, even when we talk about how to manage this question of efficiency, particularly as it pertains to the participation of local commissions, because I think that's really a vital aspect of what we do, not just, again, for the expertise, but for the credibility that it affords the city in conducting this process. And then secondly, just on the related point about development, I would just raise, I guess, to your attention, one of the trends that we observe in Beacon Hill, and I suspect citywide, is it is now the norm, I dare say, for developers to be among the primary proponents for applications before the Beacon Hill Architectural Commission for residential renovations. And because they're not going to be the ultimate homeowners, there can be a bit of a disconnect between their frankly economic prerogatives and the prerogatives of the would-be eventual homeowners, because they're not the same people.
Yep.
And there's because there's so many more developers now, there's a wide range of of folks doing this. There's everything from folks who are quite experienced in renovating historic properties, who hire architects who are similarly very well experienced and extremely competent, to those who have never worked in a historic district before. And as Nick can tell you, as a result, or the results have been quite mixed, even tragic in some cases. And so I just want to mention that as a challenge that we have going forward. It has other implications. I'll just be quick, but we've seen multiple properties gut renovated multiple times within as little as 2 or 3 years, which of course is a huge environmental challenge. We've also seen many of the institutional uses going away from our communities, and these are long-standing, sometimes 100-year-old organizations that are membership organizations, volunteer organizations, religious organizations that historically have been vital parts of the community. And the displacement of those institutions, I think, is a significant loss. It's happening because the highest best use of these properties economically is for high-end residential development, as one of the other participants mentioned before. Homeowners just can't compete with that. And again, I'm not asking for a solution, just raising that as something that's going to be an ongoing challenge for our consideration going forward. So again, thank you for all your efforts in all of these regards. Appreciate it.
So, thank you, Mark, for those comments and questions. I think I'll briefly respond in reverse order. And I should have mentioned, and Mark, I know you know, but I'm a longtime resident of the South End Historic District, and we are experiencing similar tensions and challenges in that district in terms of the pressures of development. To some degree, it's much, and I know you feel likewise. It's much broader than just a historic preservation challenge. The things that make these districts so attractive and so interesting, which in many of these districts is that historic architecture and the buildings and the history, also makes them highly desirable, and places where the just rapid escalation of residential value and then the attractiveness to developers of saying, oh, can I gut this and flip it? And that's a real problem in a lot of different ways, not just in the values of historic preservation, but in housing affordability and allowing folks to stay in place for longer periods of time. So yes, that's why historic preservation has to be part of these broader conversations about neighborhood enhancement, neighborhood stability. How do we move forward with making sure that the same things that make these neighborhoods really attractive and great places to live don't then price people out of actually staying in them. To your earlier question, and just to be clear, I'm not at all putting any direction of travel that we're gonna, for existing commissions, start to, demobilize. What I'm raising is that, and as folks on this call may know, is that we have, more than a half dozen proposed architectural districts under consideration going forward. I don't want us restricted by the only model to address the historic preservation aims of those districts, if they move forward with designation, is another separate district commission. Because if we do that, the added volume of pressure and staff, and just staffing that up is the only is the only method for getting local input, I think locks us into sort of a resource issue. And we have some of the districts that historically have been drawn are pretty small. And if we question whether or not those have been combined with sort of a neighboring district, would we be able to deal with quorum issues more easily, right? So it is not some, it is an exploration to make sure that we're focused on the outcome of historic preservation. I think part and parcel of that, and you raised really well, Mark, is that local input from folks in the neighborhoods is absolutely critical. I'm not locked in of saying the only way of doing that is a separate district commission, of having folks in. I want us to make sure we're thinking holistically about the best path forward, so that we can accomplish historic preservation in a way that is efficient for everybody. But I certainly hear your concern. And I do want to be cognizant, we've hit 7. I think Kawana will take the last question from Ava. This is the beginning. Happy to take questions in writing. Again, happy to take invitations for visits or for meetings going forward. But Ava will take a last question, and then I'll wrap up.
Thanks so much. It just happens so that everything that Mark has said was also reflecting my own concern, and I don't want to belabor the point of the importance of those commissions, but I just really want to emphasize that people who work in City Hall, even if they have the best of intentions, which I believe they do, are not always familiar with the context of the properties that are subject, to various development schemes and proposals. So if we don't have commissions where long-term residents who are committed to those districts and understand the context well, if they cannot be an important part of the decision-making process, then I think we would be weakening the effectiveness of those districts. So I understand your concern that you probably have limited resources, human resources, not enough district planners for the number of districts that you anticipate to have. And that those district planners, they get busy and bogged down, maybe discussing things with the commissioners, but it's a balance that we need to strike, because I wouldn't feel comfortable if any district was only managed by someone who doesn't live there. The whole goal of coming up with our district where I live was to give the community a voice, and I believe that people in other districts across Boston feel the same way. And I'm just curious, how many districts does Boston have right now, and how many district planners manage those district commissions?
Nick, you probably have these off the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, we have 10 historic districts and 1 landmarks commission, and we have 4 planners.
Yeah, and budgetary problems, I acknowledge that this is challenging, because ideally I would be asking you, please hire more people. And very, very quickly about the trees, it just happens so that we are all on board with the environmental goal of keeping Boston cool, especially now when we feel the heat, with the impact of the heat waves. And is there any way that the environmental department can also work with the historic preservation people to ensure that we don't lose valuable large shade trees? And that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, so great last question. And then, so certainly hear your concerns. Again, there's no intent for me to move forward with actions that sort of disempower local accountability. This is about, enhancing that in a way that's efficient. So, I don't want folks to be unnecessarily concerned, but it is being cognizant of people's time and the size of some of these districts and the challenges of finding people who are willing to show up at monthly meetings, not necessarily knowing if there's, things on the agenda. So we'll strike the right balance. I'm convinced, we'll do that in a way that, again, emphasizes, historic outcomes. On trees, yes, you've seen a lot of action on tree ordinances and policies and tree canopy. We have some significant additional resources to focus on tree and canopy coverage and the preservation of healthy old trees. Same way with the preservation of buildings. That's the easiest way forward to canopy coverage is preserving healthy old trees wherever we can. So we're certainly looking at canopy coverage, and that is a preeminent also climate and environmental justice issue. We can't be locked into the neighborhoods now that have good canopy coverage and not bringing similar canopy coverage to those that for environmental justice and redlining reasons we're never invested in. So we do need to prioritize canopy coverage in EJ communities. So with that, thank you for spending an hour with me. I look forward to further engagement with you all. Please do reach out to Kawana with any questions or invitations. My orientation is in the 3D, so I hope to see people in person, either here or in the neighborhoods as we move together on continuing the great work of historic preservation in Boston and evolving it going forward and putting our best foot forward on some pretty awesome milestones that are around the corner in 2026 and 2030.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I left my information in the chat in case you needed it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Juan, are we good? Do you need me to hang on the line and all?
Nope, I don't.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
All right.
bye.
See you soon. Bye.